Hello. In this video I'd like to talk a bit about what goes on in a creative writing workshop, and it's not a video I've planned from start to finish, so I may say some things that I find a bit surprising, and I'm not sure where it's going to go. But the first thing is that I've taught in a number of workshops in different universities and on courses like Arvon courses, which are residential courses, and I've done stuff in libraries, prisons, elsewhere. And workshops can be very different depending who leads them. Obviously, there's lots of particular nuances, but in a way, the workshop form, although it's sometimes a bit of a mystery to people outside it, and that's why I'm making this video, the workshop form is fairly standard. It's hard to run a workshop with more than, let's say, 16 people. It gets a real struggle. Usually there is someone who you could call the tutor, not really the leader, the person who's running the workshop, and their job will be to wrangle those 16 people into some kind of collective that gives useful feedback. But maybe I'm getting ahead there. The thing about numbers is, if you would like everyone to contribute, if you want to make sure that all those voices are heard, 16 is a pretty large number to go round and hear from everyone on everything that comes up. If you have 3 or 4 on the other end, then it can feel like those voices are speaking all the time, and in a way there isn't the variety, and there isn't also perhaps the expertise that you sometimes get. If you have a group of 12 people, say, and something medical comes up or something legal, it's reasonably possible that someone in that group has some experience of it, and they may be able to say something useful. It's surprising how often there is real expertise in the room if you have that kind of group of people. So for me, the ideal number of people in a workshop is 1 tutor plus 12. I know that's 13, but my mum was born on the 13th, and she always said it was a lucky number for me. So 12 is divisible in lots of different ways, and as we'll see, that's one of the things that workshops do. They divide up into groups. Now, a workshop is based on the idea that it's useful to talk about writing. It's useful to hear from other people about your own writing, but it's also useful to learn how to be a better writer through learning how to be a better reader. We've got a plane going overhead. So if you're thinking about whether a writing workshop would be good for you, then one of the things you need to think about is how open you are to receiving feedback, and also how comfortable you are giving it, because feedback is the key to a workshop, and it's what everyone in it is working towards and is trying to help produce. So what happens in a creative writing workshop? Well, usually, if it's possible, everyone will be sitting facing one another. It'll be a circle rather than a sort of lecture format where someone stands at the front and there are rows of tables. It's very hard to be constructive and encouraging and sensitive when you're talking to the back of someone's head. So most of the time in creative writing workshops, there's an attempt to have some kind of circle in which everyone's faces are visible to everyone else, and there's a equality, that no one's up on a platform. Everyone's basically on the same level, got the same kind of little desk or writing table, whatever, or their notebooks on their lap. And most of the time, let's say a workshop is an hour and a half to 2 hours, there will be a number of submissions to the workshop, a number of pieces of writing that people have put in, say a short story, section of a novel, piece of biography, creative non-fiction, and they have given that to the group in advance. There are some workshops which are all done out loud, but in most cases, if someone's just reading something they've written, then they will be reading just a page or two, because it's impossible really to give feedback on something if someone reads for 15-20 minutes. It just doesn't tend to happen. So let's say that someone has put in a 15-page short story, pretty long short story, 15-page short story. They will send that to the group some point in advance of the workshop meeting. Usually it's 4 or 5 days, because if you send it months in advance, then people are going to forget, and the chances are that they need to read it fairly close up to the start time of the workshop in order to remember it and form a fresh impression and be able to say something useful. Now, in most workshops, the way that it works is that the person whose work is being discussed, say it's that 15-word story and it's yours, sits there and listens. They're not allowed to speak. They're not allowed to defend their story. Occasionally, if I'm running a workshop, I'll ask some practical question just before we begin. I'll ask the writer, is this a section from a novel, or is it a short story? Or I'll ask them, could you just say whether this character is, and it may be something that's come up about the character, is the main character the narrator, or is there something that you want to say? There are also practical things that sometimes people want to say. Trigger warnings are sometimes given, but that's usually done not in the workshop itself, but when the work is sent out. But if it's going to be a difficult topic, if it's likely to be something that people will find upsetting, then the tutor's job is probably to frame that in some way. Also, if it's likely to make people angry, if it's likely to be controversial. And that framing generally is that we're here to try and help the writer do what they seem to want to do rather than what we think they should do. We're not necessarily there to change their opinion or to make the world a better place. We're there to think about the writing itself as writing and think about changes that could be made to it. So if there is an introduction, that'll be done, and the tutor, I would say, if they're doing their job, doesn't really frame things too heavily and doesn't guide things too heavily. They'll probably start the group off, the 12 people and the one of them sitting silently, waiting to hear their work discussed. They'll probably start off with a fairly non-leading question, and over the weeks, and most workshops do tend to go on for a period of time, or maybe they're there for an intense week once every day for 4 days. But workshops pick up their own rhythm, and there tends to be a way in which the discussion starts. And I'll often say, let's start by finding what's good about this story, what's working in the story, what are the things that you really liked. And it's like any kind of feedback, any kind of shit sandwich, nice stuff, nasty stuff, nice stuff at the end. So what works? The chances are that there will be things in any story, in any piece of writing that have communicated, that have worked. And part of the job of the tutor is to get beyond that. Workshops can sometimes be too nice, too friendly. And people complain about that at the end. They get to the end of 10 weeks or something and they say, I didn't feel we really got to it until the last couple of weeks. And it's true, as trust builds, there's a greater kind of confidence in saying maybe more penetrating things, maybe more upsetting things to other people. But generally the tone is hopefully one of support, encouragement, but also insight into what's going on. So the discussion starts, and once you've gone round, maybe not sort of ploddingly everyone, but the things that are working, someone will say, but there will be a but introduced, and that but will be, yeah, I really like the way that you got the characters going really, really fast, but I felt that the story started to lose momentum in the middle, and hopefully at that point, if that person in the workshop has done this before, they won't just say that I thought the story began to lose momentum, but they will say something like, and on page 7. Now, hopefully all the pages are numbered. Sometimes they're not, and you have to remind people. But if the pages are numbered and people have got them in front of them, everyone will turn to that page, scroll to that page, and we'll all be looking at the same thing. Sometimes I'll encourage the person who's making that comment, the tutor will encourage that person to say out loud what it is, so that everyone hears it and it's quoted. And then the shift will be from a general response, so the first things that are said are often a general response to the story, what you like, to much more specific kind of line comments, paragraph comments, character notes, that kind of thing. And I would say that the bulk of the workshop takes place. This is where you really get to the good stuff, which is a lot of intelligent readers, committed readers, readers who are wanting to write themselves, and so engaging with questions to do with point of view, to do with characterization, to do with genre. They are looking very, very closely at the specific words on the page, and they're asking the question, okay, so this is doing one thing, could it do it in a different way? And if it did it in a different way, what would be the pros and cons of that? You're not trying to rewrite something in the way that you would do it. You're trying to imaginatively get into someone else's head and think, well, how would they do it? They want to write a thriller. They want to make this as exciting as possible. This sentence just seems to be dragging a bit. This sentence is too terse. It isn't giving us enough descriptive material. Those are the kind of things that can come up. Most of the time, I would say that a discussion will play itself out in 15-20 minutes. Sometimes, if a workshop group is small, then you could have a longer discussion, 25 minutes, say. But naturally, you get the sense that most of the comments in the room have been made. Sometimes, within my own workshops, I will deliberately try and bring out comments from people who haven't spoken before, and I have various ways that I'll do that. For example, I will say, okay, so no one can say anything that's been said before. You can't just agree with someone's previous comment, come up with something new. Or even what's the thing that you really think you maybe have held back but needs to be said. Now obviously that will be within a workshop where a lot of trust have been built up. Towards the end of the workshopping of an individual story or piece of writing, the tutor's likely to try and gather things together, not necessarily to summarize and present a verdict, but they're going to see if there's anything that is worth bringing out that maybe hasn't come out of that discussion. And that's the moment where I would choose to teach, if that's the word. I would choose to say something more general about point of view and time, or about the use of language, the kind of way that related to genre. Could be punctuation, could be anything. At that point, when the workshopping of a bit is over, of a story, the person who's written it, the author, is given an opportunity to react. They usually start by saying thank you. They usually say that it's been really helpful. Hopefully they say that. And then from that point on, they may clarify a few things. They may want to respond to a particular person. Now sometime within workshops there are personality clashes or just a very, very wide divergence of taste. And those things are, again, something the tutor needs to be aware of, and hopefully those things will stay friendly. But there is a a pushback, and writers can say, well, you thought I wasn't doing this, but this is where I was doing. However, I would say most of the time that the fact that someone finds themselves explaining something they've done should give them pause to think whether they've actually done it in the way that they think they have. The very fact that they are discussing something, very often the most useful thing that can happen in a creative writing workshop is that someone comes to put a piece in, to have it workshopped, and they're very, very concerned that all the discussion will be about X, that no one will have anything to say about anything else. It's like, having a spot on your face and thinking that people aren't going to notice what you're wearing. And most of the people don't notice that. Most of the people aren't hung up on the thing that the writer's hung up on, but a workshop can sometimes focus very exclusively on one particular aspect of a story that the writer maybe hasn't considered, or they thought that was something that they'd solved, that wasn't a problem at all. So that kind of focus, the fact that something becomes a subject, or the fact that something isn't clear, it can often be the case that a writer, because they know their narrator, doesn't really introduce them. We don't know what they look like, we don't know what sex they are, those kind of things. And that doesn't happen until later on. And so if you've got a workshop group and they say, well, I really didn't know, I really wasn't sure about this. It was only on page 5 that I found out that it was a woman narrating this story. Very often workshop groups tend to associate that the person who has handed in the story, the writer, is very similar to the narrator, until that's proven to be otherwise. So they may make that assumption. There may be a discussion sometimes that's completely wrong. The writer may sit there in the workshop and think, oh my God, everyone's really misunderstood this story. How can they have done that? How can they be so stupid? But then they're forced to think, well, these are committed, intelligent readers, and they've given it a good read, and what they've found is not what I've put there. They haven't followed the breadcrumbs. They don't know where this story was going. Maybe that's more the case with novels, and short stories are ideal for workshopping because all of them is read within the preparation for the class. A lot of them can be discussed during the class, and there's no hiding place. There's no way that the writer can say, well, later in the novel all of that's explained, later in the short story all that's explained. With a novel you can say later in the novel that's explained. So by the end of a workshop, it's quite probable that, say, 3 or 4 stories or sections between 5,000 words, something like that, will have been workshopped, and there's a sort of diminishing returns, particularly if you teach as I do in the evening. People tend to become a bit knackered, and I would say most workshops can't usefully go on focusing on work closely much beyond 2 hours. So it's likely that within that kind of period of time there will be something else, which would be a kind of mini lecture, or perhaps a discussion and that comes out of some exercises that are done in class and people reading out in class. So I would say that that's sort of the overall form of a creative writing workshop. Group of people sitting in a circle discussing shortish pieces of work, 3,000 to 5,000 words, one by one, whilst the person who's written it and submitted it to the group sits there quietly, probably taking notes, doesn't say anything, but listens to a discussion on a different level to a book group. Hopefully it's not on the level of I like that character, but is on the level of technical focus on the sentences, on the point of view, on all the things that go to make up a piece of fiction, a piece of creative non-fiction. And from that workshopping, taking things apart, just as things are taken apart in a workshop, put together, the writer learns something that they couldn't otherwise learn, because it's ultimately the closest thing, being in a workshop, creative writing, it's the closest thing to being inside readers' heads. It's the closest thing to seeing someone's reaction beat by beat to what you've put on the page. And because of that, it can be transformative. So if you're lucky, what can happen in a creative writing workshop is an absolute transformation of how you saw yourself as a writer and what potentialities you thought there were in your writing and in writing in general. So that's my kind of quick exploration of what happens in a creative writing workshop. They can be the most intense places. There can be extreme personal stuff coming out. They can also be hilariously funny. So I hope this has been useful and look forward to seeing you next time. Please do like, subscribe and share if you found anything good in this video. Okay, bye.